And with that, I'd like to bring in this morning's panel. We have Michael Waldman, president of the Brennan Center for Justice at the NYU Law School, Janae Nelson of the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, and NBC News national security analyst Clint Watts. And Clint, it's on this topic right there that I want to begin. We don't have to speculate whether the president will mess around with the vote count. We have evidence that he did it once in 2018 during that Arizona Senate race. And that's why I wanted to start here. The issue of misinformation and disinformation, I heard it from the Board of Elections folks we've talked to. We heard it from the election lawyers. This seems to be the greatest concern of this election.
And Chuck, it's called the liar's dividend, right? Once you put the information out there, you set the agenda, and then you drive people's perceptions around what reality is. You and I have talked on here a couple different times. People tend to believe what they hear first, what they hear the most. And you can bet in this campaign coming up on election night, they're going to be pushing a message of victory, a message of cementing what reality will be for them. And this is going to cause such chaos, such trouble. And my biggest worry on election night is that people will be mobilized to polling places or even advance to polling places, leading to voter intimidation or belief that the thing is rigged, even though you've had all these great experts on here today, restoring faith in our democracy and trying to tell people how they can trust the results of the vote.
Janae Nelson, this is what you focus on in some ways. I mean, with the backbone of the NAACP has been access to the polls, creating more access to it. And obviously the misinformation is of concern. What are your biggest concerns about this upcoming election? And is it the access issue?
Well, at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, we are deeply concerned about misinformation and disinformation, and of course about access to the ballot in light of the pandemic that has wrought havoc on the African American and Latinx community. As we know, African Americans are 3 times as likely to have been affected by COVID than whites, and 2 times as likely to have passed away as a result of the completely mishandled pandemic. And so that necessarily means that African Americans are more likely to have to rely on mail-in voting, and the misinformation that the president has disseminated about the reliability of mail-in voting is deeply concerning. So many people will need to rely on that method of voting in order to preserve their health, in order to exercise their constitutional right to vote, and to malign the very process that he and Attorney General Barr and so many in his cabinet use as their method of voting, and so many Americans have successfully used over time, is such a hypocritical move and is a clear and present danger to our democracy.
Michael Waldman, one of the things that we also featured in our data download has to do with spoiled ballots and how, and you just if you look at the state of Pennsylvania, it's pretty clear that it looks like that the votes of people that live in Philadelphia, and you can check the census and decide if that's going to end up impacting more voters of color, but it sure looks like more voters of color saw their ballots thrown out. So let me ask you the question this way, Michael Waldman. What is the best way to guarantee that your vote counts?
Well, the best way for anybody to guarantee that their vote counts is this year. It's an unusual year. Vote early. Whether you vote by mail early, or whether you vote in person early, whether you use drop boxes, which is actually how most people who vote by mail vote. And that is something we as citizens can do. States need money. Congress passed some, but it's all bollocksed up in the negotiations over the stimulus. More money will help states count the ballots better. The private sector can step in. But I do think that you've hit on something else, which is all of us need to understand that every vote should count, whether it's voted by mail or voted in person. Every vote should count. And this idea that there's something wrong with vote by mail in the middle of a pandemic, that's not a charge. That's a lie. And it's extraordinary to have the President of the United States going out of his way to try to undermine faith in American democracy in the middle of a crisis like this. So, we all need to be patient and understand, as you've said, it's not going to be election night. We're not going to have the announcement at 11 o'clock on the East Coast, probably the way we have other years. But that doesn't mean there's a problem. It just means people are carefully counting the votes.
Clint Watts, Facebook announced that it was going to not allow new political advertising in the final week of the election for fear of this manipulation of voting access and things like this. It looked like a nice press release, but boy, certainly looked like a lot of loopholes to this announcement to me. Did Facebook really do anything, and is advertising really the best way to stop misinformation?
Yeah, Chuck, it's a great point. Look, I'm glad Facebook did something, but it's pretty late in the game. 1 week out, as we just heard, the best thing you can do is vote early. And if there's misperceptions about when and how and where you vote, they're going to be coming out way beyond 7 days, and they probably won't be as ads. It's mostly going to be individuals that are doing this. And the question is twofold, I think. One, how do we tag that content regardless of platform? All these platforms are being used to try and sow disinformation or misinformation into the public. The second part is what I've really seen over the last 2 weeks is calls for mobilization, whether it's protests, and this is only going to converge. We've got COVID-19, racial justice protests, and election night all coming up at the same time, and they all compound on each other. There have been mobilizations, calls to mobilization on social media that I've seen across the country that has brought tons of people to local municipalities and absolutely overwhelmed law enforcement, Kenosha being one example. So I think that's the other phase. Yeah, I'm worried about misinformation regarding the election and voting. I'm really worried about mobilizations and how the social media companies can try and quell that as well.
Danae, I want to talk about voter suppression issues. Look, it was a huge issue in the state of Georgia. I think Stacey Abrams to this day believes that various tactics, whether it's voter roll purging, she believes did cost her that election. What states are you the most focused on this cycle where you're concerned about those issues?
Well, we're focused on a number of states. We're a nonpartisan organization, so our foremost concern is to ensure that every voter has an opportunity to cast an equal ballot, regardless of any party affiliation. So we're focused on states that have a majority African-American population, regardless of, again, whether they're considered swing states or not, because we believe that the right to vote is fundamental and must be protected at all costs. So we have operations in a number of states through a Prepare to Vote campaign where we're educating voters about all of the options that they have to cast a ballot to ensure that it is ultimately counted. And you've already noted that there is a disparity in terms of what ballots get thrown out, what ballots get counted. There are disparities in early voting. There are disparities on a number of fronts that make equal access to the ballot unequal throughout our country, and that falls largely on the shoulders of African Americans and Latinx voters. What we are most concerned about, though, in this particular election cycle is the misinformation that can mislead voters about where and when to vote. And we are calling upon social media platform leaders, the Silicon Valley leadership, to ensure that there are clear rules around voting and that disinformation is identified and flagged and removed from those platforms immediately.
You know, Michael Waldman, one of the things that supposedly makes our election so secure is that we have so many different rules and regulations depending on state voter registration deadlines. But it does feel as if this year that is leading to more confusion than it does security.
Well, you know, we don't have one national election. We don't even have 50 state elections. We have hundreds and thousands of elections run by counties. That's the legacy of our system as we've had it. Really, there's a great benefit to having some national standards and some national expectations. There should be access to vote by mail for everybody who wants to do it. There should be early voting opportunities and safe in-person voting opportunities everywhere. And if we have those kinds of national expectations, the kind of crazy profusion of rules won't matter quite as much. But this should be an impetus to us to understand we need to kind of upgrade, modernize, and fix our rather ramshackle system of running things.
And hopefully that is yet another thing this pandemic has exposed in all of us here. Michael Waldman, Danae Nelson, Clint Watts, really appreciate all three of you bringing your expertise to this panel. Hello from Washington, I'm Chuck Todd, and thanks for checking out the Meet the Press channel on YouTube. Click on the button down here to subscribe and click over here to watch the latest interviews, highlights, and other digital exclusives.